The most alone I've ever felt was on February 6th, 1996. It was exactly 1 week after my 30-year-old sister, Nomi, died. Shiva, the mourning period, had ended, and the rest of the world had gone back to their regular lives. My freezer was stuffed with lasagnas that people had made for me. My counters covered in wilting flowers people had brought for me. I'd already received stacks of sympathy cards. No fewer than 200 people had hugged me in the last 7 days, and yet I had never felt more alone. All I wanted to do was call my sister to debrief about what had happened, and that was the one thing I'd never be able to do again. That particular experience of loneliness is something I'd become all too familiar with. I felt it again when each of my parents died, when my other sister, Rachel, died, and most recently, when my teenage daughter, Dahlia, died. I'm not alone in feeling alone. Loneliness is so pervasive in America that in 2023, the Surgeon General declared a national epidemic of loneliness. A crisis that's not just making us feel isolated, but actually making us sick. Loneliness is as dangerous to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, there are a lot of things causing the loneliness epidemic. We live far away from our extended families. Many of us work remotely. We spend more time looking down at our devices than up at the person across from us. And yet, I submit, grief is a major loneliness driver too, and it's one that's far too often overlooked. Grief is arguably when we feel most alone, most isolated, most disconnected, most like the world no longer makes sense. It's like we go to bed one night and we wake up in a foreign land and nobody speaks the same language as us. And yet, grief is universal. We've all been there, or we will be. Do me a favor. Raise your hand if you've lost a parent. Wow. Okay. Keep it up. Keep it up. That's amazing. Look around. Keep your hand up. Raise your hand if you've lost a friend, a sibling, a neighbor. Look around. It is all of us. Now, I am aware that my losses are more abundant than most people's. I kid you not, there are people who refer to me as Shiva Girl. I have one friend who calls me Job. I have a special suit in my closet reserved just for funerals, and it gets more wear than anything else. It's good 3 seasons of the year, thank God. But there are all kinds of losses we're going to grieve over, and the one thing that's certain is that we are all going to go through it. Grief does not care where you live or who you vote for. It doesn't care how old you are. Grief is an equal opportunity emotion. You would think then that grief would bring us closer together. It ought to be the great unifier, but it isn't because we are awkward and uncomfortable around grief. We don't understand it. We're afraid it might be contagious. We don't know what to say. We're terrified we'll say the wrong thing, so we avoid it. We avoid each other. Simply put, we are grief illiterate. Now, I get it. Before I became a reluctant expert in grief, I was so awkward and uncomfortable. Back in high school, my friend's little sister died. I obsessed about what to say to her. It was my first experience with death up close, and I didn't want to get it wrong. My other friend got to her first and said, "This just totally sucks." I was mortified on that friend's behalf. This just totally sucks? That's the best you can do? Now, all these years later, I know that this just totally sucks wasn't only an okay thing to say, it was a great thing to say. We want other people to acknowledge the suckiness of our grief. Friends have always been my anchor, but when my sister died, one of my closest friends didn't really talk to me for 9 months. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed away. And it's not only the ones who avoid us, it's the ones who say things like, I can't imagine, or let me know if there's anything I can do, or at least she didn't suffer. All of these obviously are well intentioned, but none is actually helpful. And in fact, they may have the exact opposite effect of what you're going for, making the person on the receiving end feel even more alone. Why? What's wrong with our grief go-tos? Think about it. The thing that I have heard more than anything else is, I can't imagine. I think people can imagine, they just don't want to. And is there anything that makes us feel more alone than being told we're in a situation that other people can't even imagine? And how is the griever supposed to respond to that? Lucky you? Do you want me to explain it to you? Telling somebody that you can't imagine what they're going through puts up a wall and makes the person feel more isolated. And then there's, let me know if there's anything I can do, which seems like a really nice offer, but what it actually does is it puts the burden on the griever, who has enough going on without trying to figure out what you can do. Another thing I get all the time is, you're so strong. This just makes me feel misunderstood. On days when I feel like a giant blob of misery, being told you're so strong makes me feel like I'm not living up to people's expectations. It makes me feel like I have to put on a facade of strength when really what I want is permission to be vulnerable. And any sentence that starts with at least needs to just be totally erased. That's like saying, look on the bright side, and any bright side that there is up to the griever to identify. Trying to find a silver lining minimizes the depth of the griever's pain. So what might we say instead? Let's start with what we do rather than what we say, because I think that's more important. In mindfulness, there's a saying, don't just do something, sit there. And that's the most important thing we can do for a griever as well. We can sit with them, we can listen, we can acknowledge their pain, we can welcome their stories, even the ones they tell over and over again. We can share our own stories about their person. We can send pictures that we have. We can say their person's name, and we can keep showing up because grief does not have an expiration date. To this day, my favorite thing is getting a picture of my daughter Dahlia that I haven't seen before. It is the only way I have to make new memories with her. And I want to talk about her, sharing how much Dahlia loved Taylor Swift or playing with her dog or baking cookies. These things make me feel more connected to her and then to the person I'm talking to. And when I tell somebody that my daughter died and they say, what's her name? What was she like? It is an instant connector, the exact opposite of, I can't imagine. And if you really don't know what to say, why not say that? I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. And then be there for them. Bring a meal, take their kids out for ice cream, or simply sit in silence and keep showing up. The good news is the fact that we are grief illiterate means we have a huge opportunity. Grief literacy needs to be taught, and it can be. And I don't mean just to people who are studying to be therapists or pastors or enter the field in some other way. Let's make grief a cornerstone of our communities. Let's teach it in our schools, our workplaces, our religious institutions. Let's teach our children that it's okay to feel things deeply and talk about loss. Let's create workplaces where the impact of grief is understood and where meaningful supports are provided. Let's get comfortable with grief and tend to it like we do other life cycle events. At the very least, let's have conversations about it and not talk about it in hushed whispers like it's a little secret or with vague euphemisms. The Surgeon General says creating a culture of connectivity is the best way to combat the loneliness epidemic. What better way is there to do that than for somebody who feels alone in their grief? That is some serious connective tissue. Imagine the world we could create if we started connecting in this most human way, one where grief isn't a source of isolation, but a bridge between us, where sitting with someone in their pain is as natural as celebrating their joy, where vulnerability is met with empathy, not awkwardness, Because it does take two to tell the truth, one to talk and one to listen. And the truth of grief is one we are all capable of talking about, one we are all capable of listening to. We don't need to be perfect, just present. We don't need all the answers, just an open heart. And in the end, that might be the most powerful way to integrate our collective grief and heal our collective loneliness. So next time you want to support somebody who's grieving, remember, your presence is more powerful than your words. Listening is more important than giving advice, and acknowledging their pain, the suckiness of their grief, without trying to fix it, is the most valuable gift you can offer. Thank you.